The twin sons of the moon, Virella, cast a harsh light across the battlefield, turning the metallic dust into a blinding shimmer. War had raged here for years between the United Earth Command and the Zitrax Dominion. Both sides had spilled too much blood, wasted too many lives, and now, their leaders tired, desperate, and pressured, had agreed on an ancient solution, a one-on-one duel. One champion from each side. One winner to claim control over the vital outpost of Karen Ridge. No more armies, no more missiles, just a simple test of strength and skill. For the Zitrax, it was a matter of pride. For Earth, it was survival. Commander Valera of Zitrax stood tall and proud inside her war tent. Her armor was obsidian black, pulsing slightly with energy from the biocores implanted beneath her skin. She had been raised for battle, trained in 12 forms of alien combat, and carried more victories than most could even count. With her sharp, angular features and glowing eyes, she looked like a creature of myth, a warrior goddess, unshaken and confident. Around her, Zitrax officers buzzed, preparing her gear, checking stats, and offering final advice. She listened to none of them. Her attention was fixed on the screen in front of her, where a live feed showed the human soldier chosen to face her. Sergeant Joel Rayner. He was sitting calmly at the edge of a crate, adjusting the strap of his rifle, chewing on a protein bar like he had all the time in the world. No glowing armor, no dramatic aura. Just a worn-out green combat suit, scuffed boots, and a tired look in his eyes. He looked like every other human soldier Valera had crushed in past battles. Plain. Soft. Predictable. She scoffed and turned away from the screen. "This is their champion?" she said aloud, her voice ringing with disbelief. "I will defeat him easily." The declaration rippled through the tent, and her officers nodded in agreement. No one doubted her. After all, how could this tired-looking human be a threat to someone like her? But far across the field, inside the Earth Command bunker, the mood was different. Joel sat quietly as technicians ran final diagnostics on his gear. His commanding officer, General Madsen, stepped into the room, arms crossed, eyes heavy. "You don't have to do this," he said. "We could have picked someone flashier. Younger. One of the exosuit kids." Joel didn't look up. "They don't know how to lose yet," he replied. "That makes them dangerous to us." General Madsen didn't argue. Joel had fought in the Red Belt Offensive, the Siege of Titan's Hollow, and the orbital brawl above Mars. He wasn't the strongest, nor the fastest, but he had one thing others didn't experience, and a strange kind of calm that made others around him nervous. He never celebrated, never got angry, never panicked. He just endured. As the time for the duel approached. An eerie silence fell across the battlefield. Drones hovered in the air, capturing every angle for both factions' networks. Soldiers from both sides stood behind energy barriers, watching, whispering, wondering. This wasn't just a fight. It was history in the making. Valera entered the arena first, her steps echoing across the metal platform. She looked like a walking tank, her armor adjusted to her movements with fluid grace. Her gauntlets glowed with embedded plasma blades, and her breathing was steady, focused. She didn't just expect victory. She had been promised it since birth. Joel entered a minute later. No helmet. No glowing gear. Just his old rifle strapped to his back, a small combat knife at his side, and a thin layer of reinforced armor over a dusty uniform. His presence was quiet, almost forgettable, until you looked into his eyes. There was no fear there. No nervous twitch, no shifting of feet. Just that same tired calm. It was the kind of look someone had when they'd seen too much and survived anyway. The arena closed behind them, sealing the two inside a large dome surrounded by energy walls. A voice echoed from the sky, an automated signal from the neutral observers. "Combatants, this duel is to first incapacitation. No outside interference. Begin." Valera didn't wait. In a blink, she launched forward, her blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. She moved like a shadow, silent and fast. But Joel didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he stepped to the side, just barely avoiding the strike. No counterattack. No retaliation. Just calm footwork and still eyes. Valera's blade sliced into the ground where he'd been standing a second before. She frowned. She came at him again, a flurry of strikes, each one designed to kill or maim. But Joel danced around them with minimal movement, a small step here, a lean there. It was almost insulting how little effort he seemed to be using. The Zitrax audience watching on their side of the dome began to mutter, was he afraid to fight? Was he too slow? But the humans watching knew better. Joel wasn't afraid. He was studying. Valera paused for a second, backing up slightly. Is this a joke to you? She demanded, raising her voice. Joel finally spoke, his tone even and quiet. No. Just figuring out your rhythm. That made her angrier. She launched into another series of attacks, using feints and acrobatics, but something had changed. Joel wasn't just dodging now. He was predicting. His hands stayed close to his sides, but every motion had a purpose. When she swept low, he was already stepping back. When she stabbed high, he ducked without even looking. And he was watching her. Not just her weapons, but her eyes, her breath, the way her muscles tensed before a movie. He was learning her like a puzzle. And that realization that this human was treating her like a pattern to be solved unsettled her. The audience, both Zytrax and human, was silent. The duel had just begun, but already there was something unusual happening. Valera should have been overwhelming him. Instead, she was being drawn out, her movements becoming more erratic, her energy draining. And Joel hadn't even drawn his knife. For the first time, Valera felt a flicker of doubt. Not fear, not yet, but something close. She looked at Joel, this plain, tired human, and saw something she hadn't expected. Discipline. A kind of silent strength that couldn't be taught in war academies or programmed into armor. She had underestimated him. And in that moment, she realized just maybe she had made a mistake. The air inside the dome grew heavier, as if even the atmosphere was beginning to understand that something was not right. Valera's strikes had lost some of their sharpness, not because she was tired, at least not yet, but because doubt was beginning to creep in. It was subtle, hidden beneath her controlled expression, but it was there. She had entered the arena certain of her victory. Now, after only a few exchanges, she was questioning why her enemy hadn't even drawn a weapon. Why he hadn't been hit even once. Why she couldn't touch him. Sergeant Joel Rayner kept his eyes on her, like a scientist observing a storm. He moved just enough to avoid damage, no more, and said nothing. Each time Valera attacked, he gave her a little more space, then stepped closer the next time. It was as if he was drawing a map in his mind of her footwork, her balance, her timing. And while the Zytrax warrior burned through energy with every high-powered movement, Joel remained still, quiet, like a statue that only moved when it had to. Valera pulled back for a breath, her gauntlets hissing softly as the plasma blades dimmed to conserve energy. She circled slowly now, watching Joel with new caution. "You fight like prey," she said aloud, trying to shake off the strange tension. "Running, dodging, hiding. Is that what humans do now?" Joel tilted his head slightly, as if the question had caught him by surprise. Then he replied in a low voice, "We do what we must. Until we learn what we need." He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just waited. Something in his voice chilled her. It wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. And that was more dangerous than any taunt. With a shout, she charged again, this time with more fury than before. The ground shook under her enhanced boots as she closed the distance in a second, spinning low and aiming a sweeping kick to knock him off his feet. Joel leapt backward, narrowly missing the hit, and drew his combat knife in the same movement. It wasn't a glowing blade or alien tech, just a standard Earth-issue steel knife, scratched and dulled by years of use. It looked almost pitiful next to Valera's shimmering gauntlets, but Joel didn't care. He moved in, fast and close, and for the first time, he attacked. The blade flashed not toward her chest or neck, but toward the joints in her armor. A quick slice near her elbow, then a stab toward the side of her knee. Valera blocked one, missed the other, and felt the sting of metal cut into her joint plate. Not deep, not serious, but enough to make her stumble. The crowd watching gasped. For a second, silence swept over both sides. Joel had landed the first blow. The human who hadn't even raised his hand in the first phase had drawn blood from the Dominion's strongest warrior. Valera stepped back, now more alert. She looked down at her knee and saw a thin line of blue fluid leaking from her armor. Her systems beeped a warning: minor damage, but enough to trigger her internal stabilizers. Joel didn't press the attack. He just stood, breathing calmly, watching. She narrowed her eyes. "Lucky hit," he responded. "No such thing." That answer stirred something deeper than annoyance. Valera had been in dozens of duels before, quick, brutal victories that ended in minutes. But this fight felt different. Slower. Smarter. It was like fighting against a mirror that didn't reflect her image, but her weakness. She charged again, using new patterns, faking high and striking low, spinning, adjusting, adapting. She was faster than most, but Joel was still keeping pace. And worse, he was improving. He was adapting just as quickly as she was. Every clash of metal, every dodge, every misstep, he learned something. And the look in his eyes never changed. It was the look of someone who had seen worse and come out alive. Now, it wasn't just her body working harder, it was her mind. She was thinking more, planning more, calculating every move. The duel had become a game of endurance and strategy, not just power. And Valera had not trained for this kind of war. Her strength came from domination, overwhelming her enemy before they could even react. But Joel refused to be overwhelmed. In one rapid exchange, she lunged forward with a series of crushing strikes meant to overwhelm his guard. Joel parried two, sidestepped the third, then dropped low and swept her foot. She stumbled again but didn't fall. He didn't attack further, just created space again, forcing her to chase him. Again and again. Valera was breathing harder now. Not just from exertion, but from something unfamiliar. Not fear exactly. Something worse, the realization that she could lose. Joel's voice came again, low and steady, like a drumbeat in her mind. "You were trained to win. I was trained to survive." It hit her harder than his blade. In the Zitrax Dominion, warriors were taught one thing: destroy or be destroyed. But Earth soldiers had a different origin. They came from centuries of conflict, yes, but their victories came not just from strength, but from failure. From learning what went wrong and fixing it. From losing 1,000 times and still standing. Joel had learned from every war, every retreat, every scar. And now he was using all of it against her. Valera shifted tactics again, this time trying to force him into a corner. If she could trap him, she could win with sheer brute force. But Joel saw it coming. He let himself be driven back until he reached the edge, then pivoted at the last moment, rolling to the side and slicing at her exposed thigh. Another shallow cut. Another warning. She jumped back with a growl, and this time her armor flashed red. Her systems were flagging. One more direct hit, and she'd lose mobility. She was faster. She was stronger. But Joel was playing a different game. And she was starting to understand the rules too late. Both warriors stood now, breathing hard, facing each other in the middle of the dome. For the first time, the audience on both sides was completely silent. The humans watched with growing hope. The Zitrax with growing unease. Valera stared at the human soldier, and in her silence, in the corner of her mind where truth could not be ignored, a thought whispered through her pride. This human might actually beat me. The duel had gone on longer than anyone expected. From the top of the observation towers to the lowest ranks on both sides, no one moved, no one spoke. Even the machines recording the fight seemed to grow quiet. The Zitrax Dominion, with its long tradition of military pride, had placed all its confidence in Commander Valera. Her record was flawless. Her strength unmatched. She was more than a warrior, she was a symbol. But symbols could crack, and in the center of the arena, cracks had begun to form. Valera's breath was heavy now, and her movements less sharp. Her gauntlets no longer hummed with the same fierce energy. The bloodline-enhanced speed and strength were still there, but dulled by fatigue. She had trained for endurance, yes, but not for this. Not for a fight that turned her own power against her by dragging it out. She had tried to finish Joel Rayner quickly. He had refused to allow it. Now, it was as if every passing minute stole a piece of her advantage. Joel, on the other hand, stood with his knife lowered, but ready. His uniform was torn, his boots scuffed, a shallow cut on his arm was bleeding, but his breathing was steady. His eyes didn't show triumph or pride, only focus. Cold, practiced, patient focus. He had studied her in real time, letting her reveal her style, watching for patterns, weaknesses, habits. He'd been drawing a silent map with every move, but he wasn't smiling. Joel never smiled in combat. He had seen too much loss for that. Valera circled him again, slower this time, not out of strategy, but because her muscles were starting to resist her. Her thigh still stung from the cut Joel had landed earlier, and the small damage to her knee joint made her left leg just slightly less reliable. It was a tiny flaw, almost invisible to the eye, but Joel had noticed it. She could tell by the way he subtly angled his movements, always keeping her injured side in his reach. She tried to ignore the pain, tried to summon the strength that had carried her through 100 battles, but her mind was no longer clear. The crowd wasn't cheering anymore. No chants of her name. No booming support from her officers. She was alone in the silence, and her enemy was not breaking. Valera suddenly charged again, a desperate move to regain control of the rhythm. She swung hard, fast, trying to overwhelm him once more. Joel ducked, blocked, and countered a quick jab of his knife into the side of her gauntlet. The weapon sparked, fizzled, and died. One gauntlet gone. Her eyes widened. That wasn't luck. That was precision. He'd aimed for the weakest point in the gauntlet's energy circuit and hit it in motion. She jumped back, staring at her dead weapon, breathing harder now. He wasn't just fighting, he was dismantling her. Joel spoke again, softly, just loud enough for her to hear. You're not losing because you're weak. You're losing because you assumed I was. The word struck her harder than any blade. In Zytrax culture, humans had always been considered second-class fighters. Not because they were physically inferior, but because they lacked what the Dominion called structured purity. They didn't breed warriors for perfection. They let randomness, emotion, even failure shape them. It had always been viewed as chaos. A weakness. But now, standing here, Valera began to see it for what it truly was: unpredictability. Joel was unpredictable. He didn't fight like her instructors had taught. He didn't follow rules. He didn't respond the way she expected him to. And that made him dangerous. More dangerous than she had prepared for. Valera steadied herself, raising her remaining blade. Her breathing was ragged now, and her systems were warning her of heat overload. But still, she couldn't give in. Her pride, her people, her entire legacy depended on this duel. She had to win. So, she feinted left, then spun right, trying to use her remaining blade for a final strike. Joel didn't dodge this time. He stepped in. Too close. Closer than she expected. And then pain. Sharp, clean pain in her side. He had driven his knife just below her ribs, in the small space between the armor plates. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to disable. Her legs buckled. She stumbled back, falling to one knee, blades slipping from her hand. The dome lights dimmed as her armor shut down piece by piece. She looked up at him, breathing hard, half expecting him to raise the knife again. But he didn't. He stood in front of her, silent, steady. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just looked at her with something strange in his eyes, not pity, not even victory, respect. You could have finished it, she said through her breath. I did, he replied. There was no anger in his voice, only finality. The fight was over. Not by death or destruction, but by choice. The audience was frozen. For a long moment, no one knew how to react. Then, slowly, the human side began to cheer, cautious at first, then louder, rising into a wave of sound that filled the air. The Zytrax side remained quiet, stunned. Valera lowered her head. She had lost. Not just the duel, but something greater. Her belief in superiority. Her unshakable confidence. But strangely, what she felt wasn't shame, it was understanding. For the first time, she realized that strength didn't always roar. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, patient, and far more dangerous. Joel reached out a hand. It was the last thing she expected. But after a moment of hesitation, she took it. Her fingers gripped his, and he pulled her gently to her feet. The crowd watched in disbelief as the Dominion's champion and Earth soldier stood side by side. There was no hatred between them now, just a shared truth. The fight had ended. But the war and what came after was just beginning. Silence still echoed through the arena, even long after the duel had ended. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of disbelief. The Zytrax Dominion, whose warriors had ruled the stars for decades, had just seen their champion fall to a human. Not killed, not destroyed, but outmatched, outplayed, outlasted, and worst of all, defeated in front of the entire military command. Commander Valera walked slowly alongside Joel Rayner, her steps unsteady, her armor flickering with failing energy. Her pride was bruised, but something else inside her had begun to shift, something she hadn't felt since her first battle as a cadet. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity. Joel, calm as ever, didn't speak. He walked like a soldier, trained in silence, one who knew the weight of moments like this. He had not humiliated her. He had not raised his hands in victory. He had shown her something far more powerful than dominance. Restraint. As they reached the center of the arena's lower gate, a group of Zytrax guards approached 3 elite soldiers in shining blue armor, weapons ready. They looked at Valera, then at Joel, and their faces betrayed the same emotion flashing across the Dominion: shame, disappointment, confusion. One of them stepped forward. "Commander," he said carefully, "you should not stand beside a human. Let us detain him." Valera didn't even look at the guard. Her voice was tired but firm. "He is not a prisoner." "But he defeated you," the soldier replied, clearly shaken. "I lost," she said, turning her gaze toward the soldier. "He didn't break the rules. He didn't cheat. He fought better than me. That is not a crime. It is a warning." The guards looked at one another, unsure of what to do. For a moment, it looked like they might act on their own, but one glance from Valera stopped them cold. She was still a commander, and her authority still held. Joel watched quietly. He didn't need to speak. Every word that mattered had already been said in the fight. Later, in the quiet of the debriefing chambers deep within the Zytrax command ship, Valera sat across from Joel again. This time, there were no blades, no audience, no armor. Just 2 people and the weight of what had passed between them. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "You're not like the others," she said. "I thought humans were wild, weak, reckless." Joel leaned back slightly, arms crossed. "Most are. But some of us learn fast." She allowed a small breath of laughter. Not mockery, just the bitter sound of realization. "You weren't supposed to win." "I know," Joel said simply, "but I wasn't fighting to win. I was fighting to survive. And sometimes that's stronger." She nodded slowly, then leaned forward. "You changed something today," she said. "Not just for me. For all of them. The Dominion won't ignore this. They'll try to erase it, deny it, maybe even punish me for it." Joel tilted his head. "Because I didn't kill you? Because I let you live," she said. "Because I saw what they don't want us to see." He said nothing. There was nothing more to explain. After a long silence, Valera stood up and walked to the far side of the room, looking out through the wide viewing port. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the fleet. Cold, vast, indifferent. For so long, the Dominion believed it was their right to conquer them, to rule the galaxy by fear and fire. But now one soldier, one duel, had cracked that idea wide open, and cracks spread. Without turning, she said, "I want to ask you something. And I want a true answer." Go ahead. If you were in my place, would you still believe in your leaders? Joel's eyes narrowed slightly. He thought for a moment before answering. I believe in people, he said. Not flags. Not governments. People. The ones who try. Who keep fighting for something better, even when the ones above them lose the way. Valera turned to face him again. This time, her expression was serious but open. I want to know what it is you're fighting for, really. Not what Earth says. Not what your generals say. What do you want out of this war? Joel stood now, walking slowly toward the viewport beside her. His voice came low, but honest. I want the killing to stop. I want us to stop proving who's better by who dies slower. I want peace. But not the kind where one side kneels. The kind where we both stand. She looked at him closely. And what if the Dominion refuses that? Joel met her eyes. Then we survive. And we keep surviving until the ones who want peace outnumber the ones who don't. Silence again. But this time, it was a silence full of weight. Of decision. Finally, she spoke. I want to see your world. Joel blinked. Why? Because if I'm going to be part of changing this, I need to understand it. The people. The reasons. The truth. He nodded slowly. It's not perfect. You won't like everything you see. I don't need perfect, she said. I need real. From the hallway beyond the chamber, footsteps approached another Dominion officer, this one high-ranking, likely sent to deliver a decision. Valera turned just before the door opened. If they try to separate us, she said quickly, fight back. Not with weapons. With truth. Show them the kind of strength they don't understand yet. Joel gave a faint nod. The door slid open, and the officer entered, surprised to see them standing side by side. He started to speak, but Valera raised her hand. This human is no longer a prisoner, she said. He's my guest. My equal. The officer froze, stunned. And I will answer to the High Council myself. For now, the war still burned in the stars outside. Battles still raged. But here, in this quiet room, something far stronger had begun. An alliance of understanding. A turning point. And it had started not with a treaty or a surrender, but with a single fight. And the choice, not to finish it.in, the cold stillness of deep space. Change often comes slowly, like the slow burn of a dying star or the quiet drift of debris between forgotten moons. But sometimes, change crashes through the universe like a comet. Unstoppable, unexpected, and irreversible. The duel between Commander Valera and Joel Rayner had been one such comet. Its impact had not only shaken the foundations of the Zitrax Dominion, but it had echoed across both fleets, Zitrax and human, and even further, to the distant colonies and whispering halls of command. Valera had returned to the Dominion's War Council chambers. It was the first time in decades that a commander had walked in after a personal defeat. But she did not hide. She wore no helmet. Her injuries had healed, but she chose to show her scars small reminders that she had not been destroyed, only changed. The high seats, occupied by the ruling strategists, glared down at her from above. Their faces were masked by tradition, their voices filtered through ceremonial filters that made them sound almost machine-like. You allowed the human to live, one of them said. I did, Valera answered plainly. You stood beside him, treated him as your equal. Shared knowledge. Revealed internal protocol. I did, she repeated. You disobeyed the doctrine. No, she said, stepping forward. I followed something stronger than doctrine. I followed truth. A quiet murmur rippled through the council. No one had ever spoken like that before. Not inside this chamber. He bested me in combat. Not by strength. Not by superior weapons. But by understanding. He learned me while I fought him. He adapted faster than we predicted. And when he could have ended me, he didn't. Because that's not what he was there for. You disgrace the Dominion. Valera stood straighter. No. I may be the only one trying to save it. The chamber fell silent. Meanwhile, aboard the human cruiser Ardent Resolve, Joel Rayner was preparing for something new, something he'd never trained for diplomacy. After the duel, he had been hailed as a hero, but he had turned down all medals and parades. He asked only for one thing, a chance to talk to build something better. His request confused the military leaders of Earth. Some called it a trick. Others called it Navi. But there were a few important ones who listened. And so, a new mission was approved. Quiet, unofficial, and dangerous. Joel would escort Valera back to Earth, under protection, to meet with those who truly held power behind the scenes. Not just politicians, but scientists, strategists, and thinkers who shape humanity's course. Their ship was small, stripped of weapons, and manned only by those who volunteered. They called it Pact 1. On the journey, Valera sat often in the observation bay, watching the stars. She asked questions. She listened. She read human history, its darkness and light. And Joel, in turn, asked about Zitrax. Not just the war machines and strategy, but the culture beneath the armor. The art. The beliefs. The parts of them no one saw on the battlefield. It was not peace. Not yet. But it was understanding. When Pact 1 arrived in Earth's orbit, a new kind of tension bloomed. Defensive satellites tracked them. Security protocols triggered. But Joel spoke calmly over the channel. She's not a prisoner. She's not a threat. She's a beginning. After hours of silence, permission was granted to land. The first meeting took place not in a government tower, but on the edge of a quiet forest base in northern Canada, far from cities and noise. There were no cameras, no media. Just people who could listen and might choose a new path. Valera stood before them without armor. She spoke of honor, of evolution, of what she had seen in a human soldier that her own commanders refused to see. She told them plainly, "You do not win a war by breaking bones. You win by breaking walls between you." And to everyone's surprise, they listened. But nothing so bold goes unnoticed. Back in the heart of the Dominion, dark eyes watched. There were those in power who feared what Valera represented now. A bridge. A threat to the old ways. And they began to prepare. Not to destroy Earth, but to destroy the idea that peace was possible. Meanwhile, in the human high command, there were those who whispered of betrayal. Who believed Valera was a spy. That Joel had gone soft. That mercy was a risk Earth couldn't afford. Both sides began to move in secret. Ships rearmed. Fleets adjusted their courses. Assassins trained for a silent kill that could shatter everything. And yet, even in that growing darkness, something powerful had begun. A new war, yes, but not of fire and missiles. A war of minds. Of vision. A war for the future itself. Joel Rayner and Commander Valera became symbols not of who had won a fight, but of who had refused to finish it with blood. And in their quiet alliance, the universe trembled with something more dangerous than weapons. Hope. They stop being your enemy. And that's when everything begins to change.